Hey teens, thanks for joining us. This week we're going to discuss another characteristic of Jesus, and it's actually the characteristic that I think had to have been the hardest for Jesus to possess. Stay tuned to hear what it is. Hey teens, my name is Chase. Welcome back with us this week. We've been going through a series where we're talking about the characteristics of Jesus. And last week, Josh talked to us about gentleness. And today, we're going to be talking about another characteristic that oftentimes is looked at as weakness, similar to gentleness. It is the characteristic that is foreign to us in many ways. It's also the characteristic that I personally believe had to be the hardest for Jesus to possess. The characteristic we're going to talk about today is humility. And as soon as I read the definition, you'll see why I think it must have been the most difficult for Jesus to possess. Humility is a modest or low view of one's importance. So Jesus was here to save the entire world, past, present, and future. So how in the world did he manage to have a modest view of his importance? We're going to get to that in a little bit, but I just think it's crazy to think about because obviously Jesus is so important. We live in a culture today that's all about me. 10 or 15 years ago, the word selfie did not exist. And not only did we create the word selfie, we actually invented a stick that would make it easier for us to take pictures of ourselves. They didn't really last long, but it's crazy that we had them in the first place, and all in pursuit of showing off ourselves. You know, I looked up some stats about selfies, and it said that more than 90 million selfies are taken every single day. And they have a whole thing entitled now, Selfies Gone Wrong, where people have actually died in the pursuit of a great selfie. And Adriana, if you're listening, this stat is for you because I found this when I was looking up these stats, that there are more selfie-related deaths on a yearly basis than there are shark-related deaths on a yearly basis. I'm still terrified of sharks. I will not change. But anyways, pride is something that affects all of us in one way or another. Oftentimes it pops up with things that we're good at, right? If we're a good athlete, we tend to brag about our talents or the accomplishments we've racked up. Academics and being a know-it-all, having to have the last word. Being attractive and always showing off our new hairstyle or our new clothes, and we had to let everyone know how great we look. And the list could go on and on, whatever it is for you. If you have a Bible, be turning to Matthew 26. Honestly, we could look at so many passages that show Jesus' humility and what drove him to be humble. But I want to pull a few examples out from the last few hours of Jesus' life in Matthew 26. Before we read this verse, we know that Jesus asked his disciples to watch with him as he prayed this prayer in verse 39. It says, "Going a little further, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, 'My Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet not as I will, but as you will.'" And as we know, Jesus prayed this prayer 3 times, and he was talking about the cross being taken from him, so he did not have to die in this way. So what can we learn from Jesus here when it comes to humility? See, Jesus was always focused on the will of God over his own feelings and emotions. This is something we point out often, but Jesus didn't necessarily want to go through dying on the cross. And he could have opted out, yet he was humble to God's plan for his life and also humble for God's plan for our life because our lives are tied to this moment. Ask yourself, are you humble to God's plan for your life, or do you think you can handle your life all on your own? I know it's easy to say that I am humble to God's plan for my life, but do you truly live that way with your actions? I also want to point out that just after this, Judas betrays Jesus, yet Jesus calls Judas friend. He sees Judas approaching and he says, "Do what you came for, friend." And the word friend here is not quite what we think about today. Then it was the same word that 2 fellow soldiers would call one another. And I think it was a small way of Jesus saying that he still saw Judas as a brother and a soldier and would accept him back at any time. So Jesus was humble to God's plan for his life, but he was also humble to accepting back the man who had just betrayed him in the most ultimate of ways. Let's jump forward in the story just a bit to see the next example of humility. We're going to jump to Matthew 26, 59 through 67. It says, "The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin were looking for false evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. But they did not find any, though many false witnesses came forward. Finally, 2 came forward and declared, 'This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days.' Then the high priest stood up and said to Jesus, 'Are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you?' But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, 'I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God.' Verse 64, 'You have said so,' Jesus replied. 'But I say to all of you, from now on you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven.' Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, 'He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?' 'He is worthy of death,' they answered. Then they spit in his face and struck him with their fists. Others slapped him and said, 'Prophesy to us, Messiah. Who hit you?'" We'll stop there. You know, I think you and I struggle most with pride when we are falsely accused and when we're told we can't do something that we think or know we can do. And Jesus experiences both of these things back to back in the most extreme way, but yet he stays completely calm and under control. Why or how do you think this is? If this is any of us in this moment, right, we would have told them who we were before they even asked. And when they started to spit and strike us and they asked, "Who hit you?" we'd be like, "You hit me, you hit me, you hit me. You know who I am." And we'd be like, okay, like I've proved it and I'm out of this situation. If we were Jesus right here on the spot, we would do that. But I have always loved that in these verses, Jesus is silent when he has the opportunity to defend himself, but he speaks when it seems like it's a bad time to speak. Why does he do this? I think this is another great lesson of humility here from Jesus. Jesus lets them know that he is in fact the Son of God. And I think sometimes we think we have to say we aren't good at something that we actually are good at in order to be humble. We know someone like this, or we've done it ourselves, where someone's like, "Hey, are you good at XYZ, fill in the blank, painting, basketball, running, whatever?" And we're like, I'm all right, I guess. And then you start killing it in that thing that they asked you if you're good at. And they're like, you're a liar because you are clearly really good at this. See, it's okay to be good at something and say you are, but humbly. When Jesus stated who he was, it was because he was asked. And so he told them. He wasn't going to hide who he was. But we also know those people who don't wait to be asked, right? And they start pridefully telling everyone how good they are and that they're better than everyone else at XYZ thing. Let me pause for a moment. If this is you, if you're the person that's always bragging about how good you are at this and that no one is better than you at that, stop doing it. I promise you, trust me, that no one looks at that guy or that girl and they're like, yeah, I want to hang out with him. I want to hang out with her. Usually they roll their eyes and they turn around and they try to get as far away from you as they can. It is very off-putting, so don't be that person. Now, the last point I want to make about this is that we get flustered and prideful at those simple things, right? Like someone accusing us and we could easily let them know we didn't do this, we didn't do that. Or it's someone saying, you can't do this. And we get so flustered and prideful. And yet Jesus stayed calm and humble and his life was on the line. And I think that is because of what we discussed earlier, with Jesus being completely humble to God's plan for his life. Therefore, he didn't defend himself because he had submitted to that plan and wasn't going to deter from it or delay it. For the sake of time, I'm going to explain the last example from this story of the last few hours of Jesus' life. Jesus allowing himself to be hung on a cross is the ultimate example of humility. We know he could have called 12 legions of angels and come off the cross and shown exactly who he was and all he could do and prove everyone wrong, everyone that had been mocking him and hitting him. Or he could have at least tried to talk his way out of that type of death into a more glorious death. But he died the way he lived, humbly. Jesus thought of others his whole life, including in his death. He called for God to forgive his murderers, even as they were committing the most heinous crime of all time. Earlier we established that the lack of humility that we see in our world is in part because we are very self-centered and want the attention to be on us. And I want to show you one more example from Jesus' life when he actually did call attention to himself, but in a very different way than we typically do. Turn over to John 8, or you can read at the bottom of the screen if you'd like. Starting in verse 2, it says, "At dawn he appeared again in the temple courts, where all the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, 'Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?' They were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, 'Let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her.' Again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. At this, those who heard began to go away one at a time, the older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Jesus straightened up and asked her, 'Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?' 'No one, sir,' she said. 'Then neither do I condemn you,' Jesus said. 'Now go and leave your life of sin.'" So why do I read this story and a lesson about humility? So I think our pride makes us want all eyes on us, and we want to be looked at as special or impressive. And in this story, you have a woman caught in a horrible act for sure. But then she is dragged in front of who knows how many people, probably naked and humiliated, and all eyes are in fact on her, but not in the way we just stated. She is not looked at as special or impressive in this moment. She is being used as an object by the Pharisees to try to trip up Jesus, and what does he do? Usually in these moments, Jesus has a quick and perfect answer to turn the question back on the Pharisees. But this time they brought someone else into the situation. So Jesus stoops down in a very humble position on his hands and knees and completely takes the attention off of this woman. There's a debate to what Jesus wrote in the dirt. Maybe he wrote out sins, and as people saw sins they committed, they walked away. But honestly, who cares what he wrote? The point is that Jesus called attention to himself, not to brag or to show off, but rather to benefit someone else, and ultimately saved her life and potentially her spiritual life as well. I have a story from my own life that maybe will help relate. I know Jesus can be a hard bar to start with, but when I was in high school, when I was on the JV basketball team, there was a day where I was having a little bit of a rough day, and we had two guys on our varsity that were our best players. You had Chad and you had Vinny. But Chad was clearly our best player by far, but they were the leaders of the team. And they were very different though. I remember that day that time after time after time, because a lot of times the JV would scrimmage against the varsity, and time after time, Chad was just killing me. He was breaking me down, he was beating me to spots, he was executing perfectly, and I just couldn't keep up. And so after the scrimmage, JV had our practice and varsity was done, but Vinny stayed, and he was kind of doing the same stuff that we were doing in the scrimmage, and he was kind of doing the same thing that Chad was doing. He was breaking me down, he was beating me to spots, executing perfectly, but he stopped, and before, Chad was just dogging me. He was just bragging, he was being very prideful, he was making me feel worse and worse and worse. And I remember Vinny stopped, and he showed me exactly what he was doing in order to break me down. And he was helping me become better at stopping him, at stopping Chad. And I remember asking him, I was like, "Vinny, why are you helping me like this?" And he was like, "You guys are coming up after us, and I want this team to be good when I'm gone." And I thought that was really profound, and I think it's, to a lesser degree, what Jesus did for this woman. He didn't want her life to end. He didn't want, people to see, oh, I followed the law, so everything's all good, but they killed this woman, right? He wanted there to be a better outcome, and therefore the world to be a better place after he left that area. And so I think we need to be like Vinny, and more so, we need to be like Jesus. So what are some lessons we can pull out for ourselves to help tame our pride and increase our humility? First, like Jesus, we need to pray for direction and be humble to God's plan for our life, no matter what. Next, we need to not worry so much about what people think and what they believe we can or cannot do, but we need to be confident without being prideful with the abilities God has given us. And finally, if we do draw attention to ourselves, let it be for the benefit of others and to lift others up instead of dragging them down. I hope this look at Jesus and his example of humility truly helps you to begin the process of cutting pride out of your character. And as we close here, I want to leave you with a few discussion questions for you and your family or friends or teen group. Number 1, do you struggle with being humble to God's plan for your life? Do you live like you know what's best for your life rather than God? Number 2, is pride only an external sin, or can it be internal as well? And in what area of your life do you struggle with pride most? And the last question, number 3, how do you think humility can improve your relationships with others and with God? Thank you guys for listening. I really hope it helps. Check you out next week.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. We are so excited about all that God is doing right here in Broward County, Florida.